System 1, the impulsive thinker, and System 2, the calm, careful planner. These two characters are at the heart of how we think and act. So stay tuned to find out how their adventures shape our behavior and how you can apply what we talk about in your financial decision. The lazy mind. Let's have some brainy fun with the classic riddle. A bat and a ball together cost $1.10. The bat cost $1 more than the ball. What's the price of the ball? Did you quickly think that the ball cost 10 cents? You're not alone. That's your speedy System 1 at work. But that doesn't mean it's right. The ball actually cost 5 cents. So why the mix-up? Well, our brains like to be a bit lazy, and System 1 usually does the job. But sometimes, like with this tricky riddle, it gets fooled and it doesn't call in System 2 for the heavy lifting. A powerful puppeteer. You see the word S-O-blank-P. What comes to mind? Likely, nothing much. But if you read eat just before, your brain might complete S-O-blank-P as soup. This clever trick is called priming. Priming is like a sneaky idea slipping into your thoughts. For example, if you saw shower instead of eat, you'd likely complete S-O-blank-P as soap. This all happens in your brain without you knowing it. It's like your brain sometimes takes the wheel, influencing your choices, actions, and how you see things. For instance, if you're exposed to money-related stuff, you might act more independent and less friendly without even realizing it. Society's whispering in your ear. Imagine you meet someone like Ben at a party, and you find them easy to talk to. Later, someone asks if you know anyone who might help their charity. Who do you think of? Ben. Even though all you really know is that he's a good conversationalist. This mental trick is like giving Ben a shiny halo. You liked one thing about him, so you assume everything else is just as great. We do this a lot. We make judgments even when we don't know much. This shortcut our minds take is called the halo effect. But wait, there's more. We have something called confirmation bias. It's our brain's way of saying, yep, you're right. The issue is we often lack enough information to judge correctly. So we use these shortcuts and end up making not so great decisions. How does the mind use shortcuts? To speed things up, our brain uses these little tricks called heuristics. They're usually super helpful, but a lot of the times, our brain tends to overdo them. Sometimes we use these shortcuts in the wrong places and end up making mistakes. The substitution heuristic is like switching out the question you're supposed to answer with a much simpler one. For example, when asked, how well will that lady do as a sheriff? Our brain might replace it with, does she look like sheriff material? So instead of digging into her qualifications and policies, we're just thinking about whether she fits our sheriff image. That can be a problem, because even if she's the perfect candidate with loads of crime-fighting experience, we might say nope, just based on appearances. Then we've got the availability heuristic. It's when our brain goes, hey, if I hear about something a lot or it sticks in my mind easily, it must be super likely, right? Like how some people are afraid to fly in airplanes because a lot of movies depict planes crashing, even though statistically planes are less prone to accidents than cars. No head for numbers. You want to predict whether something will happen? Well, one clever way is to keep an eye on the base rate. Here's an example. Picture a big taxi company with 20% yellow cabs and 80% red cabs. So the base rate for yellow taxis is 20%, and for red ones, it's 80%. Now, if you're trying to guess the color of the next cab you'll see, just remember those base rates. Your prediction will be pretty accurate. But it's funny how instead we focus on what we expect, not necessarily what's most likely. For instance, imagine you see 5 red cabs zoom by. You might start thinking a yellow one is due soon. But no matter how many cabs of each color pass by, the chance that the next one is red remains around 80%. This base rate goof is just one part of the bigger issue with dealing with numbers. We also have a hard time remembering that everything goes back to the average. This means that no matter how far things stray from the usual, they'll eventually swing back toward that average. Past imperfect. Did you know that we've got 2 memory selves that remember things in their unique styles? First, there's the experiencing self, the one that records how we feel at this very moment. Then there's the remembering self. This guy records the whole thing after the fact. It wants to know, how was the whole thing? This tag team has a couple of tricks up their sleeves. First, there's something called duration neglect, where we kinda ignore how long things last and focus on a specific memory from the event. Then there's the peak end rule, where we put extra weight on what happened at the end. For example, a bunch of people who've had painful colonoscopies were divided into two groups. One group had a long and less painful procedure. The other group had a shorter one, but with more pain at the end. But then, when they were asked to recall the experience, the group with the shorter, more painful ending remembered it as worse. Interesting, is it not? Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation? Who takes the wheel? When things are chill and not much energy is needed, we're in a state of cognitive ease. It's like cruise control for your brain. Now in this mode, our intuitive buddy System 1 is in charge, and the more logical, energy-hungry System 2 takes a nap. But when things get challenging and we have to kick our mental engines into high gear, we enter cognitive strain. That's where System 2 comes in. It's more cautious and double-checks our judgments, so it's like the brain's safety mode. If you want to use this to your advantage, one trick would be to repeat information that would help your brain recognize familiar stuff and go into cruise control. But if you want to get those brain gears grinding for something like a statistical problem, you'd want to introduce some cognitive strain. Make things confusing, like using hard-to-read fonts, and you'll see your brain perk up, ready to tackle the challenge. So when you understand these mental modes, you can decide whether you want a smoother ride or a cautious approach. Taking chances. It's pretty amazing how the way we frame things can completely mess with our judgment. Let's talk about risk. You might think that when we know the probability of a risk, we'd all think about it in the same way. But nope, even with the same numbers, we can be swayed by how it's presented. Take the Mr. Jones experiment. Psychiatric pros were asked if it's safe to release Mr. Jones from the hospital. Group 1 was told there is a 10% probability of violence. Group 2 heard, out of 100 patients like Mr. Jones, 10 go violent. Now guess what? Group 2 was almost twice as likely to say, nuh-uh, don't release him. And then there's this sneaky thing called denominator neglect. It's when we ignore plain stats for flashy mental images that mess with our decisions. So the way we present info can completely change how we think about it. Our brains are kind of fickle, aren't they? Not robots. If you like oranges more than kiwis and you're given a 10% chance of winning an orange or a kiwi, you'd pick the orange. No brainer, right? But let's say you and a friend both have $5 million. According to utility theory, you should be equally happy with your wealth. But what if you had to go to a casino and you started with $1 million and turned it into $5 million, while your friend started with $9 million and ended up with the same $5 million? You wouldn't feel equally happy, right? So there's something more to how we value things than pure logic. Keep watching to find how we don't always make rational decisions like utility theory predicts. Our choices can be quite strange and, well, seemingly irrational. Gut feeling. Alright, so if utility theory isn't the be-all and end-all of how we make choices, what's the alternative? That's where prospect theory comes in. It shows that we don't always make logical decisions. Consider two scenarios. In one, you're given $1,000, and you choose between $500 for sure, or a 50% chance to win another $1,000. In the other, you have $2,000, and you must pick between losing $500 for sure, or a 50% chance to lose $1,000. Rationally, you choose the same in both, but people don't. Most go for the sure thing in the first scenario, but gamble in the second. This decision is influenced by our fear of losing, and it shows that we evaluate things differently based on our starting point. False images. Our minds create mental images to help us understand things and make decisions. For instance, we have a mental picture of what summer looks like. However, we often rely too much on these images, even when facts disagree. You might dress for summer despite a weather forecast for cooler conditions. To avoid this overconfidence, use reference class forecasting. Instead of trusting your general mental images, consider past experiences. Additionally, plan for both success and failure in your long-term risk policy. By preparing and protecting yourself with evidence, you can make more accurate predictions. For example, carry a sweater in case the weather isn't as warm as your mental image suggests.